Hello students, I'm glad you can watch. This video covers the salient topics of the case Covid-19 testing at Everlywell. In March 2020, as coronavirus Covid-19 spreads rapidly across the U.S., Everlywell founder Julia Cheek considers how to respond as a small startup specializing in at-home lab testing. After making dramatic budget cuts in anticipation of an economic recession, she pivots her organization to address the country's Covid-19 testing shortage. But after a hectic few weeks building enough capacity at her partner labs to process 30,000 Covid-19 tests, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, releases a public statement warning that it has not granted approval for at-home Covid-19 tests. Cheek must decide whether to abandon Covid-19 testing in light of the FDA statement and return to her core business or persist in focusing her nascent organization on Covid-19 tests, an opportunity whose commercial merit is unclear. In addition to telling the story of Everlywell's origins and fundraising trajectory, the case also includes information about the U.S. in vitro diagnostics industry, which manufactures and processes tests that detect disease in body fluids. Set at the very beginning of the COVID-19 public health crisis in the U.S., the case also offers an opportunity to evaluate a startup's responsibilities to society and shareholders, even amid its search for a profitable business model. After studying this case, you should be able to evaluate a startup's business model and unit economics, consider how to build competitive advantage in an emerging market, evaluate strategic and tactical choices in an unpredictable regulatory environment, assess a company's obligations to shareholders and other stakeholders amid a global health crisis, and finally to evaluate the risks of operating a business in a highly regulated space. You may find it useful to watch some of the videos I placed on eCampus. You can get there by clicking on the Case Videos link in the sidebar from the course homepage. One of these videos about Everlywell is called Lori Greiner Hits the $1 Billion Mark, Shark Tank. This is a clip of a Shark Tank episode in which Everlywell appears. The first minute of this clip can give you a sense of the company's product line and appeal to investors. The video takes place prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, so it helps to transport you back to that time to consider the business outside the COVID-19 opportunity. For this part of the discussion, you should focus on evaluating the company prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. Why did Everlywell struggle to raise money when Cheek first started the company? Is this a good business? One deterrent for investors is the high regulatory costs involved in building a healthcare business. Although the company's current tests are laboratory-developed tests, or LDTs, and therefore do not require regulatory approval, see case page 3, future tests could attract scrutiny from agencies such as the FDA, ensuring compliance with legal requirements that may change unexpectedly requires constant investment in legal fees. One misstep or oversight could derail the company's growth path. Another contributing factor to tepid interest in Everlywell is a misconception that the costs associated with lab tests are covered by health insurance. See case page 5. Venture capitalists may be unaware that these costs can be prohibitive for many Americans and that saving a few dollars per test is meaningful for the majority of households. Without that insight, investors will not see a worthwhile opportunity in Everlywell's business. Investors may not be the only ones who are unaware of the opportunity here. Consumers also require education. As Cheek describes on page 5 in the case, quote, "It was a new space, it was a new product, and people didn't know why they needed it. They didn't even know you could collect samples at home. We also had to overcome this perceived barrier that people believed insurance would cover these tests." Close quote. This consumer education effort will require a substantial investment in marketing, which Everlywell's backers may not want to fund. Even if consumers are willing to pay for the tests, will they be willing to pay enough to offset Everlywell's costs? These costs are not insignificant. According to Everlywell's initial projections, the company allocated $1.1 million to branding and marketing to launch its products. See case page 5. If Everlywell has a strong value proposition, competitors may soon crowd the space, investors may not see an opportunity for Everlywell to differentiate itself once competitors surface, particularly if its brand is not very strong. One of the most important aspects of an attractive business model is whether the customer relationship and thus revenue can be recurring in nature. In-home testing could be viewed as a one-off transaction where customers will need to be acquired each time a single test is procured and where there will be little continued ordering of tests from the installed base of current customers over time. We should also talk about attractive features. Everlywell's vision of transforming the consumer testing experience is compelling for some students. You may like the direct-to-consumer model Everlywell has adopted because it allows the company to own the relationship with the end user and empower users to take control of their medical care. This aligns with a recent trend in which consumers have become more involved and educated participants in their care, seeking information or even taking actions on their own before consulting a physician. See case page 3. Consumers want convenience and would love to avoid going to a health clinic or waiting and paying rising copays for a physician visit for lab tests. As the popularity of telehealth increases, demand for at-home testing products, a complementary service, is likely to grow. Other students may see an opportunity to pivot to a business-to-business or B2B sales model which has lower customer acquisition costs, or CACs, and less seasonality. In this model, Everlywell could partner with health insurance plans to monitor diseases among policyholders or with pharmaceutical companies conducting clinical trials. Everlywell addresses a significant pain point in healthcare by bringing certainty and transparency to the lab testing market. People are increasingly experiencing sticker shock upon viewing their medical bills, particularly the costs attributed to diagnostic testing. See case page 3. This unpredictability is partly attributable to the wide variation in pricing for the same diagnostic tests, even when they are administered in the same city. See case page 3. Finally, Cheek's product addresses a large and growing market. The global in vitro diagnostic medical device market alone was estimated to be worth $67 billion in 2019, and experts expected it to grow. See case page 2. Now that you have evaluated the opportunity from a few angles, let's delve into Everlywell's unit economics. Are the unit economics attractive? What assumptions must you believe for them to be attractive? In fact, the initial unit economics appear challenging. In the early months of the business, the average cost to acquire one new customer, the CAC, was $57, while the average order value was $160. See case page 6. If we assume the gross margin is 30 to 40% based on industry norms, for example, large publicly traded LabCorp has a gross margin of 35.43%, while Quest has a gross margin in 2020 of 38.5%. See case page 3. Everlywell spends $96 to $112 on product-related costs, or costs of goods sold, COGS, plus $57 to acquire a customer. Here is the math. At 30% margin, $160 in AOV, or average order value, which is a metric that tracks the average dollar amount spent each time a customer places an order on a website or mobile app, times 0.3 equals $48 in gross profit. At 40% margin, $160 in AOV times 0.4 is $64 in gross profit. Even under the more optimistic scenario of 40% gross margins, the difference between the gross profit of $64 and the customer acquisition cost of $57 is only $7 in contribution margin. Under the more conservative scenario of 30% gross margins, the company loses $9 on every order after factoring in product-related costs, or COGS. If Everlywell can achieve repeated orders where the customer acquisition costs can be spread out over multiple orders, the economics of the customer's lifetime value, or LTV, improve. For example, if the average customer orders 1.5 tests over their lifetime, Everlywell will make $240 in revenue and $96 in gross margin at the 40% rate as compared to the $57 in customer acquisition costs. Thus, the ratio of customer lifetime value, or LTV, divided by customer acquisition costs is a useful metric. and a typical measurement for assessing unit economics that is very sensitive to achieving repeat orders, as can be seen in Table A. For high-growth firms, the ideal LTV to CAC ratio is 3, so these figures are low even if the company can generate substantial repeat purchases. To improve its unit economics, Everlywell will have to vertically integrate to improve its margins, increase customer retention, raise prices, or lower its CAC, customer acquisition costs, by building its brand. The most impactful step Everlywell could take would be to acquire a laboratory and vertically integrate, hence capturing more margin per customer. Both vertical integration and brand building require a significant upfront capital investment, and so a good follow-up might be, how can the company successfully execute on its plan if 1. It is dependent on raising substantial capital to do so, and yet 2. Historically raising capital has been a struggle for Cheek? Let's talk about pivoting to COVID-19 tests. Review the events in the case spanning from 2019 to 2020 prior to the pandemic. This is covered in case pages 8 and 9. Everlywell's sales rose 100% in 2019, and the company raised $50 million in funding, but its partner laboratories struggled to meet its needs. See case page 8. When its largest laboratory partner canceled its contract, Everlywell recognized it needed to build up testing infrastructure internally. See case page 8. In February 2020, Cheek raised an additional $25 million in venture capital, see case page 9, but within a few short weeks, the COVID-19 pandemic reached the U.S., raising concerns about economic recession. Against this backdrop, Cheek weighs how to respond, see case page 10. Should Everlywell have pivoted to COVID-19 testing? So the question is whether or not to stick to the company's core testing products and endure a potential recession, or pivot toward an opportunity to release COVID-19 tests. Much of the decision depends on whether Everlywell should treat COVID-19 as a temporary situation that is best addressed by larger players, or as a transformative opportunity that could lead to long-term changes in the telehealth and at-home testing markets. There are risks on both sides of this decision. So if you believe, yes, that they should pivot into COVID-19 testing, from this vantage point, releasing diagnostic tests during a public health crisis is a large opportunity to prove the value proposition of home-based testing to the consumer. It also presents a chance to generate public awareness of the brand, thereby lowering customer acquisition costs and improving unit economics. As a startup trying to establish a leading position in the at-home testing market, there are risks involved in not releasing a COVID-19 test because it allows other companies to build relationships with customers who may purchase at-home collection kits for other health reasons after the pandemic is over. Competitors could also get a head start on developing relationships with regulators. Although the cost of investing in COVID-19 testing capabilities will likely be great, the opportunity cost of not making those investments may be greater. The pandemic presents an opportunity to get customers habituated to the experience of self-testing. And if the pandemic precipitates an economic recession and consumer spending suffers, demand could drop for Everlywell's other elective test kits. During a healthcare emergency, consumers may not be thinking much about preventative medicine that is not related to the virus. But as the pandemic endures, the convenience and safety of an at-home collection test kit may increase adoption as consumers avoid trips to the doctor's office. The other option is no, stick to the core product. From the opposite point of view, forging ahead with an unproven test risks damaging the company's brand and even causing harm if the test does not produce accurate results. While the company has experience managing the logistics of at-home sample collection, the stakes are arguably higher for this test because the disease is so contagious and deadly. Given the company's recent struggles with its largest laboratory partner, adding a new test that may see high demand could present serious supply chain risks. The Everlywell brand will get widespread exposure in the press if it is first to market with an at-home collection kit for COVID-19. If they commit any significant errors in the test launch, and those are publicized, the fallout would be disastrous for the brand's reputation. Given the risks of pursuing a COVID-19 test launch, consider the broader context of the decision Cheek faces. As a small startup, why not leave it to the big companies to address the testing shortage. Startup companies can often move faster than larger enterprises and may be able to address immediate needs more effectively. Although Everlywell has a small footprint, even its limited testing capacity will make a difference given the nation's severe testing shortages. See case page 11. Offering a critical product during a pandemic may be an expedient way to scale a company. Everlywell will not have to pay to acquire these customers due to heightened demand for the product. Once consumers are familiar with the at-home collection process and the digital results platform, it will be easier to convert them to purchase other testing kits. Although Everlywell's scale is limited, Cheek could partner with a larger firm such as LabCorp or Quest to increase her company's impact. In such a partnership, the larger firm benefits from Everlywell's expertise with a direct-to-consumer model, which Everlywell benefits from the lab's financial resources and scale. So far, we have mostly discussed the benefits and disadvantages of the COVID-19 opportunity for Everlywell through a strictly commercial lens. But for many, releasing a COVID-19 test is a matter of corporate social responsibility. Many believe Everlywell has a social obligation to help fight the virus. Debating the limits of social responsibility and shareholder obligation is an important part of the strategic decision making. Think about how this decision would be viewed from a shareholder perspective. Was Cheek's decision to pivot to COVID-19 appropriate given her obligations to shareholders? Many may argue that Cheek's primary responsibility is generating a strong return on invested capital to her investors. Spending $1 million to stimulate test kit innovation may be seen as using their investment to donate to charity or conduct social entrepreneurship experiments. Shareholder primacy has long dominated business decision making. In 1970, economist Milton Friedman asserted that the social responsibility of business is to increase its profits. According to this theory, also known as agency theory, the primary objective of the CEO is to act as the shareholder's agent and represent their interests. Recently, however, the Business Roundtable, a corporate lobby which had supported shareholder primacy, reversed its position to state that business had an obligation to all of its stakeholders, including society at large. The COVID-19 dilemma is a good entry point into this discussion. One argument worth entertaining is that the interests of shareholders and society may in fact be aligned in this case. Can you think of why Cheek should use company investor capital to pursue social missions? Next, the Chief Medical Officer, or CMO, is concerned that this is not an optimal time to launch a high-stakes product given the company's cost-cutting measures. To support her position, Cheek will likely emphasize that the company cannot afford not to enter the fray, given the amount of competitive activity in the space. See case page 9. How would you address this issue with another group of stakeholders, employees? Cheek has decided to give $1 million to independent labs equipped to manufacture a COVID-19 test kit for at-home collection. See case page 11. Think about this question. You've just frozen your hiring, layoffs may be next, and now you want to give some of your precious capital away to third-party labs. How will that be perceived internally? Most believe employees will understand the financial pressures and will want to help out. Others, though, may feel like the company's primary obligation is to the employees. How would you motivate your team? Let's also talk about regulatory uncertainty. This last section addresses the final decision described in the case. How should Cheek react to the FDA's announcement that at-home tests for COVID-19 are not authorized for consumer use? It may be helpful to read an excerpt from the FDA's press release. See Case Exhibit 6. Decisions available to Cheek are to cease production of the COVID-19 test and revert to the company's existing test portfolio, or continue with the COVID-19 test launch and in effect ignore the FDA statement, or she can release the test only to medical professionals. Given the tone of the FDA announcement, it would be rash to continue with a consumer test absent FDA authorization. If Everlywell were to release its test as planned, bad press and public backlash could follow. The outrage evident from consumers' reaction on social media to the stated price of the testing kit, $135, according to case page 11, reveals the sensitivity of the matter. Many believe virus testing during a global pandemic should be a public good and a human right. Charging for such a service at such a high price point, even if it only covers the company's costs, will invite substantial criticism. Charging such a price without FDA authorization will only make matters worse for Everlywell's public image. Given the shaky rollout of COVID-19 diagnostics in the U.S. thus far, see case page 10, Everlywell may not want to enter this space at all. The FDA's recent guidance is difficult to decode and may indicate that the regulatory process is poorly organized. As a researcher says on case page 10, the virus is faster than the FDA. Everlywell may end up making substantial investments in the COVID-19 test, but not be able to recoup the cost due to regulatory delays. On the other side, many see an opportunity to collaborate with regulators and build relationships at the FDA that could benefit Everlywell in other testing areas. By reaching out to regulators proactively, Everlywell can establish a reputation as a trustworthy firm that will comply with health laws and act in its customers' best interest. Meanwhile, the company can release tests for the people who need them most, health workers. Given the FDA statement, do you think Everlywell should pivot away from COVID-19 and focus on its existing kits? Have you become more cautious about the opportunity in the aftermath of the FDA statement? To wrap up the case discussion, here are some key takeaways. Everlywell's unit economics appear weak, calling into question its plans to scale quickly. Inserting themselves between labs and consumers as a new branded intermediary provides Everlywell with an opportunity to control the customer experience and create long-term value. Reviewing Cheek's strengths as a CEO, we can note that her ability to articulate a vision and execute against it earned her more capital. When the COVID-19 opportunity appeared, she was in a strong position to seize it, given her recent efforts to slow down Everlywell's growth and improve its business operations and unit economics. Cheek decided to persist with COVID-19 tests, focusing on medical professionals initially, a strong early adopter market, while engaging the FDA collaboratively. In May 2020, the FDA issued an emergency use authorization, or EUA, for the Everlywell at-home COVID-19 sample collection kit and the testing protocols used at its partner laboratories. In December 2020, Everlywell announced that it had raised $175 million in a Series D funding round. With this additional funding in hand, the company planned to expand its portfolio of routine diagnostics used to monitor chronic disease. Although employee growth was flat in 2019, the company more than doubled in size over the course of 2020 from 90 to 254 employees. At first glance, the COVID-19 pandemic appeared to require a conservative approach. A number of Cheek's investors advised her to conserve capital, but when it became clear that the U.S. government and large diagnostic companies were failing to react nimbly and serve citizens' testing needs, an opportunity opened for Everlywell to help society and fill an unmet need. Unlike her competitors, some of whom burned bridges with regulators by releasing their tests without FDA buy-in, Cheek's calculated but efficient approach became a competitive advantage in the rapidly changing regulatory environment. While large corporations may be equipped to serve a larger constituency, startups' agility in times of crisis make them invaluable partners to government during a crisis. Still, the quick decisions Cheek made during the early days of the pandemic would not likely have been possible without the support and trust of her investors and employees, which she earned through her transparent leadership. One small example of that is her monthly investor updates, evidenced in Case Exhibit 2. Finally, it is worth addressing the issue of shareholder value and corporate social responsibility. Cheek is in a unique position at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, not yet a household name and with an economic model that is not quite working. Everlywell has little to lose and potentially a lot to gain by taking on more risk in exchange for a potentially larger outcome. Due to the high level of anxiety surrounding the disease and a pervasive lack of trust in institutions, their actions would be scrutinized carefully, for example, determining how to price the test. Case page 11. While the long-term impacts of Everlywell's decision to pivot to COVID-19 testing were still unknown as of early 2021, it's important to reiterate that shareholder and stakeholder interests do not necessarily conflict. And that's the end of this case review. Thanks for watching.